Friends, we are at our site 614 Robindale. This will be the 5,000 square feet house. Right now we are working on the foundation, and we caught that moment when it's important to focus on preparing the forms and trenches for the footing. This stage is extremely important because it gets inspected, the so-called layout inspection. Once you've set up all the forms, you need to complete this stage. Otherwise, once you've poured the concrete and once it is set, it will be impossible to change your foundation. The first step is, of course, building the batter boards and stretching the strings, which define the boundaries of the foundation. You can see these strings here. Here they are stretched. And batter boards, such an interesting name, are wooden corners specifically made to stretch the strings over onto the nails. These strings are stretched in order to ascertain the exact nature of the diagonals and ensure that the house has the shape of a square or rectangle. But let's get back to the steps. The next step is when you use the same strings to determine the shape of the foundation itself. And after that, you set up wooden forms that we see here. After you set up the forms, or before you set the forms, you dig trenches for the footings. The blind lace is created by the letter pi. That is, the footings go inside the ground. Accordingly, you need to dig trenches. After you set the form, you determine the elevation of your slab. There's such a concept. The first floor elevation is the zero level of your house. You determine it using a level and strings. As you can see behind me, there are yellow strings everywhere, including around the pool. You have determined the level where your SLP will be located. So you need to make it a little lower, and in the areas of the footings, dig even deeper to go below the ground level according to the drawings. Your structural engineer will specify how deep the footing should be. The footing can be 2 feet, 3 feet, or 4 feet deep. It depends on the soil, especially if you have a soil report. It depends on the instructions that the engineer gives you in these drawings. In our case, we don't have a deep footing. The footing will be around 2 feet. Why? Because this is a fairly level area. Here the slab is straight and the soil is quite compact. I want to pause for a moment on an optical illusion that you will likely encounter. Even if your lot appears to be perfectly straight, I highly recommend checking the elevations at beginning and end of the lot. When our client bought it, we thought it's pretty straight. We didn't realize how significant the drop would be. Notice at this point where I'm standing now, we're almost close to the ground, just 1 foot above ground level. But at the beginning of the lot behind me, you can see the level and strings are set up. There's a drop up to 4 feet there. That is the blind man. At this height, the footing is not 2 feet. It is about 5 feet, right? We need to raise the form higher, laying bags here to raise the level to the required height of the first floor. To pour, we only need 4.5 inches, and the rest will be poured as footing using a rebar framework. What does that tell us? We'll have steps at the entrance, we'll have the garage lowered because we don't want to raise the drive to that level, and we have resolved this issue. The main floor will be at one level and the garage will be lower. Okay, set up the forms. Next, we need to lay out level using the bag. For example, this is our concrete level. First floor elevation, the first level. From this point, there should be 4.5 inches of concrete. Could be more, depending on how the engineer laid it out. In our case, it's 4.5 inches. But we need to raise the ground to this level. They use these beautiful yellow bags. These yellow bags are filled with special soil. You can't fill these bags with regular soil. A special so-called filling material is ordered. When you call the supplier, ask them, what material do you use to fill the bags to set the height? Next, the bags are filled, placed in a staggered pattern, one on top of the other, and they are laid right at the edge. Footing trenches. You see, this will clearly be the footing in this place. There will be reinforcement here. Here they are, as it were, creating this right profile. Yes, they are creating a contour inward. So this bag has risen, and the empty space inside is no longer filled with bags. It's just filled with the same filling material. The bobcat spreads it between the bags, compacts it several times, drives over it. So this is the stage of fully preparing the site, with the start of the plumbing and electrical work. I'll attach a photo of what the site looks like when You can start the work for the plumber and electrician. This will be a flat area with the bags laid out. Already, probably even with the prepared spot for the rebar, maybe even part of the rebar belt. It will be installed under the footing, because sometimes we do this before the plumbers start working. It's important to understand that this stage is extremely crucial. I will draw your attention to this again, because you will not be able to move foundation after it is poured. You can only change it at the form stage. And that's exactly why we're filming this part of the video. The next step, when the bags are laid out, is for the plumber to come in, and even before the rebar, he lays out all his pipes in the slab. The drains, the water supply, the electricians come in, who do their part. After the electricians have done their part and the plumber has done his part, the rebar starts to be tied together. The rebar is tied in the trenches. There are special bent rebar pieces for the footings that create the footing perimeter. The footings will also be dug in the center. According to your drawing, for laying the final rebar, you still need to do a step called pest treatment. So you hire a special company and they come in to do the pest treatment. And after that, everything is covered with plastic, and then the top layer of rebar is placed on top. So it goes in one layer. Once you've passed the final rebar inspection, it's called the pre-pour inspection. When the inspector arrives, he checks how the rebar is tied, making sure everything is done correctly according to the structural drawings. After this, after passing the inspection, you can pour the concrete. One of the challenging stages is determining the shapes and the dimensional lines for setting the forms. What is the problem? The structural engineer usually never gives you the dimensions for all the foundation forms. The complexity lies in the architect providing dimensional lines already, considering plaster, stone, hardy board, and panel thicknesses, meaning outer dimension. For example, this shape is 7 feet long. Architectural drawings, it is 7 feet from this point to this point. But we have another inch taken up by plaster here, and 1 inch taken up by plaster here. Accordingly, I must give the dimensions of the form installer minus the plaster on both sides. And it won't be 7 feet anymore, it will be 6 feet and 10 inches. And it's better to work out these details in advance, because if you don't pay attention to this, you'll end up with the forms set according to the architectural drawings. Then naturally, plaster or hardy board, panels or stone, which has a greater thickness, will be added, and in the end, the house will turn out to be a little bigger. And if your county or your city is being checked by inspectors, very carefully and attentively, an incident may arise. The square footage of your house will be calculated as larger than it actually is. Please pay attention to this in the drawings. Once the strings are approved, you've completed your internal inspection. The guys are moving on to setting up the forms. There are a few approaches. In this case, my contractor uses ready-made panels from which he assembles the forms. You see, they are of a certain standard size. He assembles forms of different heights from them. It's faster for him. He brings this from different sites, and once everything is set up, it's ready. Sometimes they just use boards, meaning they set up these triangular supports. After that, the boards are nailed on, and once the horizontal boards are nailed in place, they also reinforce them with additional supports so that when the concrete is poured, the form doesn't shift. That's also an important point. You need to discuss with the contractor what spacing he will use for the supports. If the frequency of the supports is not sufficient, depending on the length and height of the form, then the form may shift when pouring concrete, and you'll end up with a crooked foundation. Also, once the forms are set up, I highly recommend that you check all the diagonals together with the contractor. For example, from this corner to that corner, from that corner to this corner, the diagonals will give you a clear check. A 90-degree angle. Why is this important? When will you move on to the framing? And the framers will come. They will start to laying the bottom board, and you can notice this on many foundations. And the framers will make the board exactly at a 90-degree angle. And their diagonals will match up perfectly. Could that happen? That your foundation will either extend beyond this board or will go inside under the board. If it shifts by a couple of inches, that's already a problem at 1 inch. A small problem. You can fix this situation with plaster, but if the foundation extends outward, just imagine. He laid the board at a 90-degree angle, checked the diagonals, and your foundation extends beyond the board. When it comes to the Wesby outside, and the Wesby is on the foundation, all the water will seep in. The Wesby should go into the house below the foundation. So, basically, all the moisture should drain away below the foundation. Now imagine you've poured the concrete. That's it, the concrete is poured exactly up to this level. You remove the form, and your framer comes in and places a board on the edge of the concrete. In this spot it lies on the edge, and in this spot it lies with a distance inward. For example, 1 inch. Why did this happen? Because the form was uneven. When you have this board, you can't change it. Your house must have right angles. You have a concrete overhang of almost 1 inch, see? And when you screw the USB sheet here, it will press against the concrete. It won't go below the concrete as the rules require. It will be pressed against the concrete at this point. And all the water that runs down this sheet of plaster will go under this board. Whatever you do, one option is to screw on 2 sheets of OSB. But that comes with costs. I've encountered hundreds of such situations. We solved this problem, but it comes with additional costs. You need to check it personally. Don't hand over this point of control to anyone. Check all the diagonals, all the angles, all the heights, and all the dimensions, taking the plaster into account. If you check all of this, it's better to do it a few times. You'll be sure that your house will be straight and level from here on out. According to the drawings, with all the angles at 90 degrees, it will be reliable. It will be good, high quality, the way we build our houses.